Dr. Hamied, let me start by saying that was an incredibly powerful film. And I think most people in the room, and I certainly speak for myself, were struck by something you said, which is that if it is possible to prevent the deaths of people and you don't do it, mainly because you want to make money, that's genocide. You want to expand on that?
If you are in the healthcare business or you produce medicines for healthcare, I think you cannot look at it only as a business. You're saving lives.
Okay.
So there has to be a humanitarian basis for producing medicines as well, not just profits, etc. I also feel that what we did and what you saw in the film was what we did legally. We as a company, we abide by the laws of the land, we do not break laws. And the one word in the film that really I think all of you should really consider seriously is that there should not be a sequel. And this is one of the things, because in the drug industry there is obsolescence. Drugs, now the drug that the film was all about, the first antiretroviral that Cipla provided to Africa was called Triamune. Now Triamune is not used anymore, 10 years later. There are better and improved versions of cocktails which you just take one tablet a day. And even those we are selling at below $100 a year. But what happens that after 2005, when India is now part of WTO, we cannot produce the newer drugs because they are now under monopoly. And I think now that I'm sitting in Delhi and in the capital of India, I think it is important for our Indian government and Indian bureaucracy to take a stand as to how we can avert the possible sequel to what you have seen this evening. And all of us have to put our heads together and see, because one of the things that you saw is the absolute power of monopoly. And we cannot afford, the third world cannot afford monopoly.
Can I ask you about another statistic in the film that I found very interesting, which was it said that 10 million people died in Africa and in the third world because they couldn't afford AIDS medicines because the prices were kept too high. Do you subscribe to that figure?
Yes, because from the time of see, when the cocktail was first discovered, 1997, it came into then, and from 97 onwards, in Africa alone, 2 million people were dying of HIV. The biggest industry in Africa in that period was making of wooden coffins. That was the biggest industry, which is very, very sad. One feels sad about it.
10 million people, that's
right.
4 million more than were killed in the Holocaust.
That's right, 2 million a year for the next 5 years is 10 million. So what gives me personally a lot of satisfaction, that since we started supplying the AIDS cocktail after 2001, 2002, I think indirectly India has been responsible for saving at least 10 million lives over this period in the last 10 years. India has saved African lives. And because Indian companies are today supplying 92% of the total ARVs that are being produced, formulations in the world. But what happens in the future? Let's debate that.
Okay. Let me now sort of, forgive me if this sounds rude, play devil's advocate. Let me give you the other side of the story.
Please do.
Which is that you've told us a very powerful story that's emotional. Deaths of millions of people because of AIDS. Everybody sympathizes with that. But you're playing that argument as a way of bypassing a more important issue, which is the issue of intellectual property rights.
No, we are not, because I sincerely believe that originally when intellectual property came into being 400 years ago, it was between countries that were technological at par. So Germany could take 10 patents in America, Americans could take 9 patents in Germany. So it was between technological parity. Today, if you look at the third world, and even India, even you take Russia, can you name me one Russian drug that is available in the world today? So it is only a handful of countries, America, maybe UK, Europe, France, Switzerland, whose drugs are acceptable. I, in my 50 years in Cipla, have invented drugs, but the medical profession won't use it. You know what they tell me?
What?
And they looked at my drug, my friends, the medical profession, oh, Dr. Hamied, if this drug is as good as you say it is, how come Pfizer and Glaxo haven't brought it out before you? So the stigma, like you saw in the movie, there's also a stigma from the medical profession. And unless that is removed, how do you access newer drugs? You tell me that. So what we are saying today, we respect patents. I'm not saying I'm not against patents. I'm a scientist. But we cannot have a monopoly. We are willing to pay the originator of drugs a suitable royalty. No. And Canada had this law. From 1969 to 1992, the Canadian government passed a bill called the S91. You can check it up on the internet if you want, which said that the Canadians could import or make any drug they wanted and pay the originator a 4% royalty. And I've always said that if it was good enough for the Canadians at that time, why is it not good enough today for India and the developing countries and the third world countries?
Why didn't Canada stick with that law?
Because they joined NAFTA, pressure from the Americans. And NAFTA was Mexico, America, and Canada. And one of the conditions for Canada to join NAFTA was they had to give up S91.
Let me try and summarize it to the extent that I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is A, the business of making medicines cannot be only about profit.
Correct.
It has to be more than just profit.
Correct.
B, when there is an emergency situation of the kind we saw in Africa, profit must go out the window because avoiding genocide is our top priority.
I think so, and that does not only apply to HIV, AIDS, it applies to many, many diseases.
I'll come to that, but I want to say the third thing you're saying is that you are not saying that a patent regime is useless. You're saying, yes, there should be patents, people who create drugs should be rewarded, but you're saying there is an alternative to the present system.
I'm saying they should be suitably rewarded. You can have a royalty system, and no harm in it. If you look at the world's top selling 100 drugs today, or 750 drugs, 70% of them are made and marketed by countries that did not invent them. Tamiflu, marketed by Roche, was not invented by Roche. It was invented by Gilead. Roche pays a royalty to Gilead. The top-selling AIDS drug tenofovir today was not invented by Gilead. It was invented in Czechoslovakia, in a laboratory in Czechoslovakia. And the original patents are Czechoslovakian. They don't get anything out of it. So it's a very, very difficult situation where today the inventors are not in a position to market the drugs. I'll give you many examples.
Give me some.
The Japanese are leaders in science. They've made famotidine, diltiazem, norfloxacin, all the latest drugs. But they have no marketing ability. So they have to go with a begging bowl to the big pharma companies, please take our drugs. And all these drugs that I've just named are sold by the big multinational companies, and they pay royalty to the Japanese inventors. So if they can do it, why can't India do something similar? Or the third world do something similar? See, I'm not a lawyer, so you can ask the lawyers. I'm more of a scientist. But I do believe that something of this nature has to be worked out.
Okay. You said, let's try and avoid this in the future. Now, when you talk about giving a reward to people who've invented something and still preserving some kind of patent regime, are we drawing a distinction between life-saving drugs and ordinary drugs, or do you think this applies to everyone?
I think it applies not, life-saving is a very difficult term.
Okay.
I would say restricted to vital, essential drugs.
Define an essential drug in this.
Well, if I've got a headache, maybe paracetamol is essential for me. If I've got cancer, then maybe capecitabine is essential for me. So it depends on the disease pattern that you have. I mean, look at India today. With the disease pattern in India, with 110 million mental health, 80 million cardiac, 60 million asthmatics, 60 million diabetics, 50 million hepatitis cases. It's a health care crisis. It's a permanent crisis. And now I'll go back to you to what happened on the 14th of November 2001.
Okay.
When there was a meeting in Doha. Maybe some of the people here attended that meeting in Doha when we had the Doha Declaration. And the point 5C of the Doha Declaration clearly states that every country can decide for themselves as to what is a national crisis in healthcare, I'm saying. And this includes HIV, malaria, TB, and other epidemics. There were 149 countries at the Doha Convention, and the vote, this was put to the vote, and it was unanimous 149. When it came up for ratification 2 years later, the USA objected to the words other epidemics. And it was debated, and the other country said, sorry, it has to be there for an emergency. Suppose there's plague or some pneumonia or something. So they put it to the vote. The vote was 148 to 1. And guess who won? The one vote.
And the one was America.
Veto. And till today, the Doha Convention has not been ratified. So I think, again, like it was in the movie, I said in the movie, and I repeat, that I think it is very important for every country to decide what is best for them. And for India, I'm begging the Indian government, I've done it for a long, long time, please do what is best for our country. And we went away, we fought for 12 years. I personally fought to get Indira Gandhi to change the patent laws in '72. Now what we did, please understand, the patent laws that we changed in '72, we did not change for any other group of products except healthcare. And what we said, you cannot patent the end product. You can only patent a process to make the end product. And
so that's been the subject of a lot of controversy as well, hasn't it?
There's always controversy, but that in its wisdom helped the Indian drug industry today, so that India today is regarded as the pharmacy capital of the world. And the third world is looking to India. Except for the developed countries, nobody looks at India, but at least the developing in the third world look at India as a leader in pharmacy, world leader. And what I've suggested, which was not shown in the movie, was that in September 2000, when we made the initial offer, I offered to the third world free technology to produce antiretroviral drugs. There were 30 health ministers at that meeting, 5 prime ministers from third world countries, and nobody took us up on our offer. Much later, only Uganda came forward. And we have now got a factory in Uganda. And I would like to repeat that if any of the third world countries want technology to produce drugs, I've offered this technology to the Indian government as well. The Indian government today have half a dozen drug factories in India. Hindustan Antibiotics, IDPL in Hyderabad, Bengal Chemicals, God knows, Smith Standard Street. Why not use the public sector drug industry that we have in India today more usefully? And every year at my company's AGM, I announce that we are willing to provide free technology to the Indian government for any essential drug that they wish to produce in their public sector companies. And I hope it is taken up. And also, which we were discussing earlier today, that the backbone of the industry is not who makes the tablets that you saw, who makes the raw materials.
Yeah.
And I think that is where we have to concentrate much, much more. Who provides the basic raw materials that go into that?
Now, there are two sort of broad positions on this. One is your position, which is that India is the center of the drug industry. It manages to make excellent world quality generics. It doesn't profiteer from it. You're willing to make the technology available to the rest of the world. But there is the other view, and you saw that to some extent in the film, which is that the generics that Indians make are in some way counterfeit, on par perhaps with pirated DVDs on the streets of Bangkok, or fake Louis Vuitton bags, sort of stuff that can't be trusted, that may look like the real thing, but is dangerous. Is that a fair criticism?
They called me a pirate when we started the thing.
Yep.
A pirate according to their laws. Again, I repeat and repeat and repeat, we abide by the laws of the land. In India, I abide by Indian laws. In Germany, German laws. In America, American laws. But you can't ask me today to apply American laws to India when I'm doing something in India. In Brazil, I conform to Brazilian law. Philippines, Filipino law.
But what about the quality issue? The suggestion there is that Indian drug companies are not as careful, and we've had cases recently about quality as they should be.
No. What happens when the word quality is used very flippantly, by the way, you have guidelines for quality. If the authorities change the goalposts without informing you, and then come and inspect, and why aren't you conforming to that? But you never told us. Even in regulatory, Indian regulatory, Japanese regulatory, American, are all different. If I'm selling in India, I abide by Indian FDA laws. If I'm selling in America, I have to abide by American laws. And these laws and regulations are keeping on changing. Every country improves their things, like in other ways of life as well. So if you are improving, I think the companies should be informed that laws are there, that you want more stringent laws, and then we abide by it. But I don't think, in all fairness, that Indian companies are willfully breaking any laws, because please understand that the active ingredient going into a drug, the cost of that is so low compared to the selling price of the drug, that why should one make counterfeit? Where spurious is not spurious and counterfeit, substandard is the word I think you should use. We do not make substandard drugs. Counterfeit and piracy is something else, that a hole-in-the-wall company in Bihar, without any drug license, copies my product, like you see the handbags, that is something else. But the leading 200-300 companies in India are totally kosher.
Okay. Let's move on to TRIPS, because the film ends sort of by suggesting that whatever crisis had been averted will probably come back if we go along with TRIPS and the WTO. Could you explain to me drugs you think you could make if there wasn't this problem?
Yes. Now, for example, in HIV alone, there are today 4 drugs that are being pushed forward and which will come into therapy in the next 2 or 3 years, which we can't produce today. So you're going to get back into a stage of monopoly in HIV. What happens then? You must understand that in drugs, resistance develops, and you have to keep on changing the drugs. So there's obsolescence of older drugs. Newer drugs take their place. So you have to keep on changing. If I'm blocked from changing, what do I do? It's a very difficult situation, And I think, in all
Are
fairness,
there newer drugs that you would like to make
there
that
are
you can't make?
half a dozen drugs.
Give me some examples.
Dolutegravir for AIDS, it's a GSK drug, invented in Japan by Shinogi.
Okay.
It's a license to GSK. Now GSK has made a partnership with Pfizer. It goes under Viv. But this, in all fairness to Viv, they have now offered this drug to many companies through a medicine patent pool in Geneva. And probably we will sign up with them that this drug we can make here and offer to about 67 countries.
Since we're on trips, one of the criticisms is, of course, one of quality, but there are other criticisms. That is that Indian laws, when it comes to things like evergreening, compulsory license, are actually rigged in favor of people like you against what you would call big pharma and therefore need to change.
No. I think there's more of a legal aspect, but if you want me to answer the scientific
You want me to call
aspect-
Murli up here? And,
Pardon?
You want me to call Murli up here? And
If you want to ask him,
Yeah, hi, Murli,
he will
welcome-
tell you
welcome
on compulsory licensing better than I can.
Okay. Come and join us. You can introduce yourself better than I can.
Yeah, and
So I'm Murli Neelakantan, I'm Global General Counsel at Cipla.
Okay. Tell us about evergreening, compulsory licenses, the criticisms that really we've rigged the system against international companies and in favor of people like
no,
yourself.
evergreening I can answer. Compulsory license
All
I
right,
need for him.
you can take one can take each. All right.
The Indian government, in the patent law which they had to change because of TRIPS, introduced a clause called 3D, which says that you cannot patent different salts or esters or polymorphs of the parent drug. This essentially, what the Indian government said, that minor incremental inventions, changes would not be permissible. Now this is law in India, it is not law in America, it is not law in Europe, where you can patent. So the international community who wants India to be TRIPS plus are not seeing the light of day because India is already TRIPS plus. The Americans want us to dilute so that they can have frivolous patents on incremental innovation, which India is not allowing. So the Indian patent law as of today, according to me, is more stricter than the American patent law. And they should also look at it that way. And I think our Commerce Minister some time ago made that statement and told the Americans that you should look at our law as being much stronger than your law because we are not allowing frivolous inventions to be patented. So I think all the developing countries and the third world countries should really follow India's example on that. And India, in fact, we won the case in the Supreme Court against Novartis on this very issue.
But Vir, I think the way to look at it is the principle of evergreening
In the white
is now quite bad throughout the world.
All right.
And we're seeing it in Europe as well, where they're looking at interpreting their existing patent law to say that we will not allow evergreening. So it is not a concept that is unique to India, unique to the developing world. This concept has now gone to Europe. In October last year, an Italian court said they will not allow evergreening. So this is not an Indian view of the world, it's not a third world view of the world. I think there is realization that lots of drug companies are effectively extending lives of products. So with small changes, you continue to perpetuate the monopoly beyond the patent. So you create a little change, extend the patent by another 15 years. So the real life of a drug now is almost 50 years. And you're keeping everybody out from that monopolistic market for more than one generation. So that is the issue with evergreening. It is not unique to India. A principle exists in most parts of the world. And they're coming around to the fact that it's a good thing to stop evergreening.
What about compulsory licenses? I think you'll first have to explain what they are and then tell me why we're doing the right thing.
So let me put it to you this way. If you had a monopoly but chose not to produce the product and instead allowed no one else to produce it as well, you're creating a situation where nobody can produce this essential product. You don't do it and you don't allow anyone else to do it. That's what a patent does. That's not good for the market. And therefore, a way of cracking the monopoly and making sure a monopolist doesn't hurt the market is to say, that's fine, you don't have to produce it, but I will get someone else to produce it and ensure you get paid a royalty. I look at it differently. You've got this nice plot of land, which you own. You grow roses on it. I'm paying you money to look at the roses. How is that a bad thing for someone who owns the land? I'm not taking anything away from you. You're the person with the patent, the plot of land. All I'm doing is saying, I'll pay you a royalty for the pleasure of looking at your roses. To me, I look at that no differently from a compulsory license. I'm not taking anything away from anyone. And it is the threat of compulsory licenses that ensures the monopolist cannot price at will. And we've seen that in the movie you saw, how they dealt with Ciprox. It's the same story with everything else. If you can do it for every other business where there is a monopoly, we do it. In Europe, we did it for telephones. We did it for electricity. We did it for gas, all monopolies. We forced them to get into a competing market. And look at the price of telecom services today, transatlantic. You look at the price of gas. If you can do it for things like software, shouldn't you be doing it for drugs where lives matter? You can do it for phones. We've got FRAND, which is that you can force companies to license out patents for telephones. And you allowed them to do that. So what is the big issue with life-saving medicines? If you can do it for video games, why can't you do it for medicines?
This is one thing, and then I'll just give one...
I want to throw it open, but you go ahead,
one live example of what I meant by, earlier we talked evergreening, the AIDS example, that the first, when we started in AIDS drugs, myself in 1991, the first drug and the only drug available was a drug called AZT. And the story of AZT is very interesting. AZT was first invented in 1963, not for AIDS. The use of AZT for AIDS came up in 1985. It was patented, usage patent. There's a usage patent as well in 1985. So that patent was valid till 2005. Nobody could do AZT except Burroughs Wellcome. Then what happens? Burroughs Wellcome got bought out by Glaxo. Then what happened around 2003? Glaxo turns around and in 1997 they took out a patent on a combination of AZT and lamivudine. And then they said that AZT by itself is useless, should not be allowed. So the combo patent is valid till 2017. Today, so indirectly and directly, a drug discovered in 1963 is sold under monopoly till 2017, 54 years of monopoly. Now, is that what patenting is all about? That's my...
It's a powerful argument.
Yeah.
Let me throw that open. Anybody wants? Sir, we're going to give you a microphone. So, may I request you to identify yourself before you ask your question?
My name is Cueto Sosa. I am the ambassador of Cuba.
Sir.
I know how the doctor feel because I am the ambassador of one country who have the most durable blockade, economical, financial and trade by the superpower of the world, by the United States. And before to say anything, we are very grateful and glad that we have a fantastic relation and historical relation with India, and we have also a very good relation with the pharmaceutical industry in India. We have people who live in Cuba and save life in Cuba because companies like Cipla and other companies give to us the possibility to buy in a reasonable prices the raw material to produce our drugs. The relations in the field of biotechnology and medicines between India and Cuba are very strong. Right now we have a joint venture with Biocom, and we are in the process to put in the market some drugs who can fight some types of cancer. I live in Africa as a soldier to fight the apartheid regime. And the disease created by the exploitation of Africa by the colonial powers is more lethal than the apartheid. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, the lady there. And we'll come to you, sir, right afterwards.
Thank you. My name is Manjula Bhatia. I'm a journalist of Swiss Radio. So my question is about the movie we have seen. What has not been shown in the film, and the film has been focusing on South Africa, why there has been such a huge spread of AIDS. And everyone maybe remembers that Thabo Mbeki, the president of South Africa after Mandela, for a long time he has been denying the seriously, the fact that AIDS was a very serious disease, and he was playing down that very much. And this was not mentioned in the film, and there was made only an equation between the Western big companies killing people in Africa.
So what is your point, ma'am? Your point is that if Mr. Mbeki hadn't said that and the drugs still continue to be unaffordable, people wouldn't have died?
No.
No, that governments have the duty to make...
All right. So you're saying the government failed in its duty?
Yeah, first of all, yeah.
You want to answer?
No, but I can't answer that because what happened in South Africa was that the president of South Africa at that time, Mbeki, said that AIDS was no disease.
Yeah.
Now, AIDS per se is no disease. If you are HIV positive, what happens, your immunity is low, so you are more susceptible to other diseases. AIDS by itself is no disease. So you die then of fungus infection, you die of pneumonia, you die of cancer. But just the term is given AIDS. So I think the whole thing has been misinterpreted. And please bear in mind that I didn't make that film. I had no part of that film. I think one of the people who made the films is in the audience here, but that's a separate issue. But it's made an independent film, and the person who made the film gave his and their point of view. Just to answer your question briefly, about 20 years ago, I gave technology to Cuba to produce some raw materials, APIs, and if Cuba wants help, please come to us again.
But you concede a basic point, that it isn't just the Western drug companies, governments also have a responsibility?
I think all countries have a responsibility.
Okay.
And
Sir, sorry, that's okay, I'll get on to it. All right.
Brazil.
I'm Cesar Bonamigo, Deputy Chief of Mission of Brazilian Embassy. Well, we are countries who are basically on the same page on this issue. There was one piece of statistics which was new for me in the presentation, in the film, which is the funding of research. It's something I had never seen before, and I was a bit surprised. I was thought much of the research was done by private companies. So if you could tell us more about the source of this information and attach it to it. Is this a new front? Do you think state development, joint development can be a new, better front?
It ought to be, because in America, the American government last year spent $31 billion just on drug research. But they do the concept research in the universities. The two initial drugs for HIV, which was invented in the late 1990s by Yale University. They gave it to Bristol Myers Squibb, who then marketed Stavudine and DDI. And Yale got a royalty from BMS. And Yale was earning $40 to $60 million a year by way of royalties. So that system in America is a very, very good system of public funded research at the university levels. Then what happens with the drug companies, they take up something and then bring it out in the form of a drug. Like today, Gilead has a new drug for hepatitis C. They never invented it. Some other company invented it, they bought out the company. It can happen. Or license the product. So this goes on in the drug industry a lot. Where the concept is that people don't understand the family of drugs. The first beta blocker was concept. After that, by twitching this and twitching that, you get a family of drugs. To make a family after having the first fundamental concept is easy. And that is where the big pharma take a position. You have the first losartan for heart blood pressure, then you get candesartan, and you get telmisartan, and all the sartans come. Now that type of work is quite relatively easier to do.
But I mean, the point he's making, and the point that struck me also, is that the justification for the high price of drugs has always been, for every 500 drugs launched, only one drug succeeds. They need this money for R&D, and therefore to keep looking at just the cost of the manufacture and the selling price is silly, because the money goes into research. That film suggests that that's a lie. You agree with that?
I partly agree with it, and partly I don't agree with it.
Explain that. Yeah.
But Murli wants to say something.
So the way you look at it is, where is the cost?
Okay.
So if you say money is spent in R&D, we saw the numbers there.
Right.
Money is not actually spent in R&D. Money is spent in creating a regulatory barrier which makes it impossible for someone to compete with you. So I go and buy a drug, I pay 50 million for it. Then I create a barrier for anyone else to get a regulatory approval or challenge a patent. That's approximately 100 million in cost. So effectively, to have a seat at the table to compete with someone, need to have a willingness to pay between 100 and 150 million just to take a look at the cards.
So basically, you're agreeing with the film then?
I am.
You are.
And we've got
So why are you
numbers to back
disagreeing
it.
with part of it?
No, because science has to be ongoing.
Okay.
And like the gentleman said here just now, I think governments have to play a very active role in the development of that science and participate in it, like the American government does. Hats off to them, that they spend themselves $31 billion. The two ladies sitting there connected with in the Department of Pharmaceuticals in India, I'd like to know how much does the Indian government spend in drug research in India? What has happened to the public sector factories that the Indian government created 20, 30 years ago? They've all shut down. So something is basically wrong. And I think what we need, at least in India, I'm an Indian and a very national Indian.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see India develop. And any help the government wants from so-called successful Indian drug companies, all of us are willing to come forward and help India attain better health care.
Okay. So taking off from the gentleman's question, yes, governments must get more involved in research. That is perhaps the way forward. That happens in America. Perhaps it doesn't happen enough in India, and we should do it. But as for this business that they have to charge us high prices because they spend money on R&D, that's not really valid.
No. Charging high and reasonable prices is a question of value. Just now, this new hepatitis C drug you read about in the press, Sofosbuvir of Gilead, is priced at $1,000 per tablet. If I could make it, I assure you I would give it for $10 a tablet or less. But that's a separate issue.
But this is what gets me.
But yeah, but how do they
arrive at the figure of 1,000?
arrive at the figure of 1,000?
How?
Because they go to the insurance companies and they say, look, you insure patients who are who've got hepatitis C. What does it cost you for one patient of hepatitis C per year? And the insurance companies say it costs us $168,000 to look after one patient. So the company then says, if we give you a course of 84 tablets at $84,000 and it's secure, so the insurance companies jump at it. Now that is meant for the United States. So I don't want to spoil that. Good luck to them. So every country has to decide what they want. Okay. Now, Sofosbuvir was not patented in Egypt. And suddenly, the company then goes to Egypt. Are you willing to pay $4,500 for a course of this drug? So that is the price in Egypt. Now, in some country, if say Cuba develops a synthesis of this drug and markets it in Cuba, they could give it for $200. Okay. 84 tablets.
So basically, they sort of make it up as they go along.
You price a product on value.
Right.
And the value is different in different countries.
But not on cost. Not on cost to develop.
Cost has nothing to do with drug industry.
Yeah. 2 questions. The gentleman there, or the lady first, all right? Please go on. Could you stand up, ma'am, please?
I'm Rashmi Saxena. I'm a journalist. Just one question, which is more of a clarification, actually. You said that because of the new laws and TRIPS, there are certain drugs which you could manufacture in India at a lower cost and you cannot. Which are the diseases we are looking at when it comes to these drugs?
That's a very good question.
You. Very good question. There are some in HIV today. Some 2 or 3 new drugs in HIV, many drugs in cancer one could produce cheaply. We've been in court, my company has been in court in the last 2-3 years to get some of the patents revoked. We have won some cases. TB, for resistant TB, there are a couple of new drugs that have come up internationally we cannot produce. So there's TB, HIV, cancer. Which is under today, at least among the diseases that I know of. So cancer is terrific. We won a case last year against Novartis on the cancer drug, again on the question of evergreening, etc. And essentially, number of cancer drugs that are sold at 3 lakhs per month, we are offering at 6,000 a month. So it makes a very big difference. So my question, again, it's something that I'm not supposed to talk about, but the government of India has a system of price control. I don't want to criticize the government on their price control, but I have said so publicly, so I'm repeating this, that if you're having price control, you should have price control on drugs that are sold under monopoly. To have price control on drugs that are made by 20 or 30 companies, where free competition, the only way prices will come down in any country is by free and open competition. That is the only way you bring down prices. You cannot bring down prices by monopoly. So what I suggested to the Indian government, you have a price control system for monopoly drugs, drugs that are only sold by 1 or 2 companies in India. The rest there are today 175 brands of the drug that was pointed out, Cipla for anthrax. What are you putting it under price control? The normal water finds its own level.
So you're saying let the market find its
Let the market find. But for the monopoly drugs, you do something.
The gentleman there.
Yeah, Dr. Awad from SANA, Bureau Chief, South Asia Bureau Chief of Syrian Arab News Agency. The question is the price is one of the story, is the fight between the apartheid regime of the technology that you denied to do, because when it comes to medicine, you have to give everything on the cover, the composition, so it's easy to to develop the same. My question is, why can't you look onto a joint venture of productivity, especially for essential drugs, in with the giant company like they are doing for certain products for the cheap labor in India?
That's a very good question, but I have myself gone with a begging bowl to one or two of the big companies to give us products, at least for India, at least. Believe me, is not so easy. And we have signed up with one international company for one of the antiretroviral drugs. We are now following a system, at least in my company, that if we cannot win the battle of patents, like we have challenged so many patents, and we'll continue to challenge unrealistic patents or frivolous patents, then it is best to join hands with the big pharma companies and do something jointly. It is easier said than done, but we are definitely, or Indian companies are definitely following your suggestion. Okay. But they are restricting you to the countries, they're restricting you to what you can do or not do, etc., etc. So it's not all that easy, but we are going ahead and doing it.
Are you optimistic?
No,
No.
But no. For certain products, yes. I can't say I'm optimistic for certain products, but not down the line that I can get any product I want. Because, like for example, Johnson & Johnson on the anti-TB, the new TB drug that they have for, they've said, sorry, for India, we want to do it ourselves in India. We have a company in India. We want to market it, and we're not giving it to anybody in India. What can I do? Nothing. So it varies company to company, product to product. There's no hard and fast.
The gentleman there had his hand up first. I'll come to you, Patrika, next.
So the big pharma...
Sir, could you please identify yourself?
My name is Manish Chand. I'm a journalist. I represent India Rights Network. The big pharma industry says India's approach to creating a national list of essential medicines with controlled pricing is the wrong way to go. Instead, this suggests a tiered system of pricing to ensure access to medicine for the poorest of the poor. That is my first question. My second question is the film compellingly brings out the geopolitics of the drug industry, the north-south divide, where governments are becoming handmaidens of corporate big pharma industry. What is the way out? Because this is such an entrenched process, nothing will move if the government, this way of doing business doesn't change. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take this first to Murali. This business about the tiered system has been talked about a lot.
Yeah.
The argument is you keep telling us poor people can't afford our medicines, but why are we subsidizing your rich people as well? So you think a tiered system is a possibility?
I think if you let the market decide, so let's look at what you want to price. A tiered system makes sense where there is a monopolistic buyer. So if you go to the UK or Europe, the government is the sole provider of health services.
Right.
They can then decide whether the poor need to pay the same as the rich. That story does not exist in India. There is no central buyer of these products. And therefore to say, I will buy from the pharmaceutical industry, and then we will decide at what price the actual user gets the service.
You're saying who will do the buying and then decide?
Exactly. So unless you have a central, the only way you can achieve it in India is to follow a European model, which is free healthcare for all.
A national health service.
Yeah, a free healthcare at the point of person.
So you think it's not going to, so your objection is not going to work because we don't have an NHS?
We don't have an NHS. In fact, even central government employees, for example, don't have a lot of medicines on their list. So even when the government does procure for employee state insurance, central government health service, there's a lot of essential medicines not on that list. So even government servants are not doing justice to their own brethren, where they're denied medicines that they could have had.
But your argument now is a practical one. What about the argument of principle, which is that you use the example of poor to force us to sell our medicines cheap, where actually your rich Indians who could well afford to pay international prices are also getting them cheap undeservedly?
I agree with that.
You agree with
I
that?
completely agree. And I'm saying it as a person who's had to use some of these drugs, very expensive drugs, and having paid for it. I'm saying that it is absolutely right. But the only way you can fix it is by ensuring at the point of impact, which is the individual, you can do it. You can't do it by saying Cipla will price in different shops so that Vir and Murli can go and access X shops and the rest of the world can access Y shops, and we'll have a differential pricing. The model doesn't lend itself to differential pricing in this country.
But you've left the door open, because if they could find a model, you'd have to support it.
That would absolutely be right.
Okay.
So I don't think we should get very excited by what's happening with 301. We've been on that list ever since it started. I don't think a lot has changed. With the WTO regime, the UN can't do much about imposing sanctions on us. They've given an undertaking to the WTO that they will not take unilateral measures. So I think it's a process that the US has to follow. There is a lobbying process. The pharma lobby is the largest lobbying group in the US, much bigger than the next two, which are oil and tobacco. And you expect that that constituency, which is the pharma lobby, needs to have a voice somewhere. But there's no action that's likely to come out of that in this year or the next that we should be worried about. So to the extent that what we have said, and we've had very good reaction to the 301 process, at least this year, I think a lot more countries like Brazil and Europe, there are European countries on that list, will look at it and say, we're not going to be scared of the United States. You know, they have a view of what the regime should be in other parts of the world. They themselves don't subscribe to that view. So several of the things they're asking of us are not part of US law themselves. So they're asking us to comply with the regime or do things which they themselves don't do.
No, but may I interrupt you on this?
That's the last thing I've got.
Okay.
I'm now 15 minutes over time already. Yeah.
One question to her was, until 1989, we followed GATT, which was the General Agreement for Trades and Tariffs. And suddenly then the Americans and the Europeans and the developed world says intellectual property should be part of GATT. That came around in 1989. India then agreed to it very reluctantly, although Dinesh Singh, the then Commerce Minister, opposed it tooth and nail. But God knows what happened, but that's another story. Then came the Dunkel draft and the TRIPS came in. India joined in 1995. What was our business? I remember in Parliament here, the Minister of Commerce turned around and said that India today has 0.2% of world trade. I would like the Indian government to tell us what is the percentage of world trade that India has today. And he said, Maran was the minister at the time, he said it will take us 10 years to reach 1% of the world trade. I mean, how important is WTO to India? It's not important to China. Russia were not members till recently. So there is a possibility, I think, if India really woke up and became an economic power in its own right, would tell the WTO, thank you very much, we don't want to be a member anymore, and go back to our 1972 patent regime.
So I think, Patuleka, the answer to your question is they're not worried, and they don't think India should be either. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're already 15 minutes.
You were asking something?
No, I said I'm already 15 minutes over time. I don't think I can.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Murli, thank you so much for clarifying issues. And Dr. Hamied, always a pleasure to listen to a legend.
Anytime.